Oh, sorry. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Janine Dominguez. I'm a clinical psychologist at the Child Mind Institute. We're a national nonprofit that supports children and families with gold standard mental health care, advice, and resources, all online and accessible to everyone. You can learn more about the resources we have available for families during the coronavirus crisis, including telehealth evaluations and treatment, by visiting childmind.org/coronavirus and childmind.org/telehealth. Today, I'd like to talk about kids' worries and fears as things start to reopen and answer your questions about that and anything else you're wondering about. Post your questions in the feed. We'll also post some links to helpful resources on childmind.org and details about the next Facebook Live. Remember, we're here every day at 4:30 and we look through your questions daily. So as things start to slowly open up, children, teens, and parents may have worries and fears about how to stay safe and what it means to start to reintegrate. And here are some things that might contribute to some of those worries. The first being there's still some level, obviously, of ambiguity about how to go about this. Certainly, there are doctors and scientists that are advising us on how to do this in a safe way. But as I've said before here, there really is no roadmap to what to do to reintegrate during a pandemic. So this can certainly increase fears about how do we stay safe and healthy, how do we continue to help others stay safe and healthy. So I can understand that level of ambiguity, certainly leading to some fears and anxiety. There's also some fears and worries about being able to maintain social distance when getting together. So our definition of what that means, that 6 feet away, might sometimes be a little bit blurry for others. And so I can totally understand there being some worries about what that means for us and what our boundaries are and what that might mean for other people as we start to reintegrate. Worries about having to draw boundaries as well. So not feeling comfortable or feeling comfortable saying, hey, do you mind wearing a mask when you come over, or do you mind staying a little bit further away? That might cause us to feel some worries, and certainly for children and adolescents on having to draw those boundaries might increase some anxiety. And lastly, parents are now also faced with a new way of having to discuss how are we going to do this as a family? So that might potentially increase some tension or some arguments if two parents aren't necessarily yet meeting in the middle, and how to approach this next phase. And sometimes that level of discussion might also cause children and adolescents to feel a bit worried about how to do this next. So with all that being said, now that I've made you worried and anxious, here are some pointers or some things to keep in mind as you're having these discussions and helping your children and teens with what the next phase looks like. So the first being, I think, as parents, really having the first level of discussion away from children and parents first, right? So what you want to do is really talk about assessing level of risk for your family, what the probability, what are the chances are of, like, if we go out, where we go, how we would, if we would get sick, what are the chances of that, how do we keep safe, and that might look differently for families who are still living with maybe grandparents or wanting to see grandparents first before getting together socially in a socially distant way. So really having those conversations and what you want to allow your children to do or not to do as a family currently. And then you can certainly integrate kids and your teens into that discussion as well. I think keeping your children grounded on what they can do, that even though things are opening up, that doesn't mean that we sort of rush out and do, that we can sort of take our time in doing this in a slow and small stepped way, knowing that there are reputable sources that we can rely on how to keep ourselves safe, how to still maintain that 6 feet apart, still maintain having the mask on, still being able to do this outside where there's less risk, doing it with, families that we know have also been quarantined. So there's still ways in which we can do this where we know that the probability of getting sick remains very low. And lastly, really helping your children and teens cope ahead. If you're deciding to allow them to do like a social distance walk with a friend, maybe planning for, if your friend gets too close, what are you going to say to them? How can you maintain your boundary? How are you going to feel when you see grandma and grandpa and you still can't give them a hug? That might feel weird, and that's okay. We can call that out and also help plan for how they're going to be able to cope with those feelings during that time. So we want to, again, provide some level of assurance, information, validate where their fears and worries are coming from, and take small steps towards the things that they can do or you guys can do as a family. So before getting into questions, there is just going to be a brief information break about our telehealth services, and then we'll come back and answer some questions.
The Child Mind Institute is a national leader in children's mental health and learning disorders. In the face of the coronavirus pandemic, we are here to support all families. Whether you need help with remote learning, stress management techniques, or support for children who are in distress, the Child Mind Institute is available to help your family cope during this challenging time. We're here for you wherever you are. To request an appointment, visit childmind.org/telehealth.
Hi everyone, welcome back. Again, my name is Janine Dominguez. I'm a clinical psychologist at the Child Mind Institute, and today we are talking a little bit about how to assure your children and teens fears and anxieties about the reopening of certain things during this time, and also answering questions about anything else. So the first question I want to get to is actually slightly different and not about reopening, but actually more about what's been happening currently in the news. And the question is, how do we talk to kids about all the things that are happening right now in terms of police brutality, the news, plus the pandemic? So absolutely, it's certain that in addition to the pandemic and the worries that are happening, there is a lot that's going on in terms of racial differences and police brutality and everything that's happening with the Floyd case. And so it's a lot to talk to kids about. And also, we encourage open communication with your children and adolescents, certainly during this time. There's a way of doing that where I think it's different for all families. Families where they're Black families who are talking to their Black children about what's happening, the conversation is going to be very different than white families who are talking to their white children about this. And there's actually a wonderful post by my colleagues from yesterday. It's actually a 30-minute video on exactly this topic. I really encourage you guys going into the archives on Facebook Live. They did a beautiful job really being very specific around scripts that you can do in terms of talking to your children about this. The one thing I would add to that is just picking and choosing what you're going to talk about, right? So meaning don't overwhelm your children. If you're going to talk about their fears and worries about like reopening and reintegrating during the pandemic time, keep it to that. Or if you want to have a discussion about this, which I totally encourage, keep it about that too. And as much as possible, for both things, even though it can be really hard as parents, you can certainly have an emotional response to what's happening right now. But as much as possible, trying to model some level of control, model level of empathy and validation, and again having open communication during this time. But a really great question. This one is more about the social emotional needs of children. So this is a good question. With preschoolers' social emotional needs, how do we safely engage them in a classroom environment? That is a really great question, and I think the what we've been hearing, I think this is more about the fall, is there's been some level of discussion, certainly as preschools and schools in general are trying to reintegrate in a healthy and safe way, how we can do that where kids are still getting their interaction with peers, and I think that's certainly part of their social emotional needs, and also keeping safe. There are wonderful curriculum out there that we can certainly post where preschoolers can actually practice social emotional curriculum where they're identifying online. And again, this is sort of the best way we can do that right now virtually, but they're actually being able to practice how to identify emotion in others, how to label emotions, how to do still sharing even when it's virtual and online. And so the way to do that in a classroom, or even just to get together one-on-one with peers, I'm just thinking of my own son personally. He's 4.5, and we just recently started to do actually like a social distance scootering with them. And so just to be able to still get some interaction in person, but they were actually really great about keeping distant and understanding about the virus and not wanting to get each other sick. And kids are incredibly resilient, and they were able to sort of maintain that, and understood when us as parents were like, well, a little too close, you got to get, stay away. And so they really understood that. Afterwards, my son did say it was good to see his friend, and also felt really sad that they couldn't hug or do things together. And that's okay. I just validated that emotional experience, and also said I was really happy that we still got to do it in this way. So I think there's hope to still be able to talk to that social emotional piece as kids start to do something in the preschool environment, hopefully in the fall, or do it in a safe way. A very good question. So another question that came in is, how do we explain summer camps are canceled, but it's okay to go to school a few months later? Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think certainly you can imagine if us as parents or as adults don't really understand the distinction, that it could certainly be confusing for children and young children. And I would say to that is, at this time, I think that we're still figuring out how to do the integration process in a slow and systematic way. So that way, we're reducing the risk of getting sick. And I honestly think we can actually explain to children and adolescents that teachers and everyone, they're getting ready for the fall to be able to do potentially a hybrid of things, whether it's in classroom and sort of how we can keep that distance and doing that in a phased way, and also doing a better job of having a virtual platform. If you think about it, we kind of quickly and abruptly did this in March, and kind of had to build a plane while flying it. And so now that we know a little bit more, I think they're trying to prepare for the fall and utilizing that summertime to prepare as well. And I think that summertime too, I would imagine camps and things like that were just not equipped to really be able to do it in a safe way. And so we can certainly explain that to kids, and also again validate that it's sad that you might not be able to go to your favorite summer camp or get that experience. So how can we sort of creatively think about what it is that we can do where we're keeping to guidelines, we're still doing a little bit more than what we were doing before, but in this safe way. So really good question. For those who are just joining, again, my name is Janine Dominguez, and I'm a clinical psychologist at the Childmind Institute. And we're talking a little bit about how to talk to your kids and adolescents as things are reopening, if they're having fears and worries about that, and any other questions that you guys have too. So one question came in, how do I handle anxiety in my 8-year-old who is missing the rest of school and the fear of starting back in a whole new year, new teacher, etc.? I think that's a really great question. So what I would say to that, a lot of kids have fears and worries about starting a whole new year with a whole new teacher. What are they going to be like? Are they going to be nice? Am I going to like them? And so I can totally understand it also feeling a little strange, or maybe adding to the anxiety of not knowing what the fall is going to look like and how they're going to meet their new teacher, if that makes sense, whether it's going to be virtual in the beginning or actually in person. And so again, I know this is kind of the word of the 3 months, but validate. Like I understand that that's going to cause some anxiety and some fear. But then I would also talk a little bit about maybe past years. I think it's this isn't the first time that they're meeting a new teacher, and so maybe talk about ways in which they were able to get through that anxiety in the past, how they were able to meet the teacher before, and also I would actually reach out to your school and see if they're open to having the teacher communicate with your kiddo ahead of time before school starts. Again, I do think in order to ease anxiety, sometimes small steps or small gradual ways of facing fear is a good way of sort of getting them acclimated and then really making the final push in sort of meeting their new teacher. And lastly, I think letting them know that they're in the same boat as everybody else, right? Everybody's kind of a bit worried and concerned about how this next fall year is going to look. And so they're certainly not alone in sitting with that uncertainty and that level of anxiety too. And then lastly, I think this is a great question, but the more you can also help your 8-year-old be in the moment, enjoy the summer as much as possible, engage in some things, so that way he's also or she's also building on that confidence, and that also might be really nice before the fall year starts. Yeah, but really good question. We've had some other questions come in too. So here is about a 15-year-old son who's extremely worried that we're reopening too quickly and his anxiety is getting more serious by the day. What can we do to help? So again, as I mentioned before, I can totally understand that level of worry, especially since, as I said before, it really doesn't seem like there's a roadmap to follow, and so it can really create some level of ambiguity on how fast do we reopen. So I think validating that is really important. I think also just taking a step back and letting your son know that while things are reopening, again, it's your own personal boundaries and assessing your own level of risk as a family and what you're willing to do in small ways and small steps. So you're providing some level of information, right? I know oftentimes when it comes to anxiety, we coach parents on not providing reassurance, so providing, always the same answer all the time in order to decrease anxiety. So, but there is some level, some foundation, some level of a baseline of information that you do need to provide. And that might be, hey, we've read X, Y, and Z. This is what we're going to do. Maintain 6 feet apart, wear a mask, be outside. We're still going to have some level of, obviously, high level of good hygiene. I think this is okay. Let's think of a small step of what we can do in order to either get you to meet with a friend or something along those lines. And lastly, I think honestly, if levels of anxiety are too high, this might be a really good time to reach out for services. So please visit childmind.org/telehealth. Our Anxiety Disorder Center sees a wide gamut of anxiety disorders, especially during this time with a high level of uncertainty and ambiguity on how to reintegrate. We certainly are working with a lot of adolescents, children, young adults on how to really help them during this time in easing their anxiety. So that's a really great question. think lastly, I'm going to do one more question. So it says, my anxiety has been really bad during coronavirus. I've been trying to hide it from my kids, but with reopening, that's gotten harder and harder to do. I know how important it is to model healthy coping skills for my children, but I don't know how to do that right now. Any advice would be welcome. So I think, one, it's wonderful that you're recognizing that level of anxiety and being mindful of it, being mindful that maybe your cup is too full and it's running over. I think that happens to all of us as parents as we're trying to navigate everything in addition to keeping safe, and how do we do that as things are reopening. So I totally understand that. I think what I would also say is that if it feels too overwhelming and it feels really difficult to do this on your own, again, as I mentioned before, reach out for services. We also see adults, so you can certainly visit us at childmind.org/telehealth. But also, if you worked with a previous therapist or psychiatrist, certainly reaching out to them so that way you can make a plan for how to really help yourself during this time. My go-to advice is usually do deep breathing. I cannot emphasize it enough. So deep breathing is maybe one of the simplest things to do, but really one of the most effective. So 5 to 10 minutes a day, really taking that time to pace your breathing, deep breathe, where you're breathing in through your nose and holding at the top of your breath and breathing all the way out and holding it at the bottom. And it really has short-term benefits in turning down anxiety and also long-term benefits too. So really self-care and taking that time for yourself during this time. So I'm going to wrap up. I want to thank you all for joining me again. I hope it was helpful. And remember, we're here every day at 4:30. We look through your questions daily. Check the post for the topic of our next live. The Child Mind Institute is here to help with mental health and parenting needs of this coronavirus crisis, no matter where you are. We have resources to help, from daily tips to consultation to gold standard telehealth treatments. Go to childmind.org/coronavirus and childmind.org/telehealth. Be safe, and thank you.